Okay, good evening, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much. So good evening, my name is Brian Hone. Thank you for joining us tonight, whether in person or virtually. So we have people joining us online as well. I'm the Deputy Director of MassArt Art Museum. MAAM is Boston's only free museum of contemporary art and the teaching museum for mass art. In addition to presenting thought-provoking contemporary art from around the world, MAAM also supports the college public mission by offering free public programs, including panels and lectures that address timely and pressing topics that are relevant for our community, whether it's new narratives, reproductive rights, climate change, or Indigenous knowledge. MAAM is also proud to be a part of the Boston Public Art Triennial, a citywide celebration of public art organized by Artistic Director Pedro Alonso and curated by one of tonight's panelists and MassArt alumna, Tess Lukey. So snaps all around. Another artist featured in the Triennial is Nicholas Galanin, who explores Indigenous representation and narratives in two nearby sites. His riveting installation, Aáni duwasáakw, or I Am Called Land, is showcased in MAAM's upstairs gallery. And I think this goes like this: Pick Yourself Up is on view just around the corner in Evansway Park. Tonight's program, Let's Talk Kinship Process, will use these two artworks as jumping off points for a rich conversation.
Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Tung and I'm the Executive Director for the MassArt Art Museum, or MAAM. And it's my pleasure to start our conversation, Let's Talk. But before we do that, let's have some introductions. Examining the complexities of contemporary Indigenous identity, culture, and representation, Nicholas Galanin works from his experience as a Tlingit artist. Embedding incisive observation and reflection into his oftentimes provocative work, he aims to redress the widespread misappropriation of Indigenous visual culture, the impact of colonialism, as well as collective amnesia. Galanin reclaims narrative and creative agency while demonstrating contemporary Indigenous art as a continually evolving practice. Speaking through multiple visual, sonic, and tactile languages, his concepts determine his processes, which include sculpture, textile-based work, installation, photography, video, performance, among others. This contemporary practice builds upon an Indigenous artistic continuum while celebrating the culture and its people. Galanin contributes urgent criticality and vision through resonant and multifaceted works. Nicholas Galanin. Tess Lukey is an enrolled citizen of the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead Aquinnah and serves as the Associate Curator of Native American Art at the Trustees of Reservations, where she's based both at the Fruitlands Museum and the DeCordova Sculpture Park and Museum. Her curatorial practice centers on the intersection of historic and contemporary Native American art with a specialization in pre-20th century materials. Lukey helps museums shape new strategies to engage Native collections through community-driven frameworks. She holds a master's in art history with a minor in museum studies from the University of New Mexico and a dual BFA in ceramics and art history from MassArt. In addition to her museum work, Lukey is also an independent curator for the first ever Boston Public Art Triennial and a practicing traditional artist, continuing the ceramic and basketry techniques of her Wampanoag heritage. Let's talk. All right. So my first question is for Tess. Tess, you're formally trained in the history of art here at MassArt, and you're a citizen of the Aquinnah Wampanoag Nation. How does this combination influence the way you curate?
Fantastic question, Lisa. Thank you. Being Indigenous, being Native from this area has been really important to me since I was a young kid, even learning here at MassArt and learning that art history was what I wanted to do for a living, that I wanted to be a curator. And so I knew that I wanted to be involved both with my own community and the larger Native community. And so the work that I do, as Lisa mentioned, is really about building community and utilizing those frameworks within exhibitions and gallery spaces and now in public art spaces. And so my Wampanoag heritage is a part of everything that I do. My family will tell you that there's probably not a moment that I'm not talking about art history in some way, because I love it. It's something that is inherently a part of my identity as well as my Native heritage. And so the combination of my classical training here, my training and work with my own community that's not really classical in the same sense, kind of intersect in the way that I work as a curator and as a community member and platform for artists.
Thank you, Tess. And for those of you who are wondering what we're looking at.
Oh yeah, I meant to mention that.
Yes, it's a show that Tess curated.
This is called Place of Intersection, Survivance in the American West. Lisa mentioned that I work for Fruitlands Museum and de Cordova, which are part of the larger trustees network. And this show actually will be coming down in a couple months, but is focused on looking at the American West and westward expansion from an Indigenous lens. So actually integrating Native voices, including contemporary scholars and community members in the space, and reactivating the works in there, really acknowledging their identities and presence and living heritage, and really tackling the inaccuracies within 19th century paintings, which you'll see on the walls of the gallery itself.
Thank you. All right, Nicholas, you've got the next question. So you'll see on the slide the installation that is at MAAM. There we go, called Aáni Yeha Duwasáakw, I am called land. I was wondering, Nicholas, if you could talk a little bit about your inspiration for this piece.
Sure, thank you. Thank you all for being here. I was invited out maybe a little over a year ago to site visit, and it was probably my second time to Boston area. So not only was I site visiting MAAM, I was also site visiting for the Triennial and the bronze work, but we'll speak about this work right now. And seeing the space was really informative to this process of this piece. Oftentimes my process involves, understanding the community, the history, the best I can, and also, the context of the space. So for this work, I think, and this is kind of the first version of this piece, and such a large setting, I was really aware that it needed to be something that was immersive in a lot of ways. And the concept of the work is a clinket box drum, so a ceremonial drum you'll see suspended. This is oversized, they're not necessarily this large in our community houses, but these drums are, suspended in a similar fashion here, so the same kind of binding, and they're performed at our ceremonies, our kuik, our naming ceremonies. There's an interesting thing I like to speak about when I think about this drum too, that through my research of, cultural research, I'm trained as a wood carver in my community, and there's so much protocol and so much other things that go into the work. We're not just carving sculptural work. We're learning history. We're learning clan, ownership of the imagery of, all these things that connect community. There was a box drum in the Burke Museum's collection that was really, I don't know, it was kind of a transformational moment when I visited the box drum. It was an older piece from a community, and it was created for one song. Like, it was meant to sing one song. And I think of this piece as something similar. It's singing this one beat. So if you go to the space and you walk in, you'll hear, the drum beat, which is like a heartbeat. So it's the drum represents a heart. And on the drum is imagery, formline imagery, so abstract imagery in our culture is used to tell stories or history or document things. And on this image here, it's an image of a child in womb. So I feel like and then the video on the walls is of water. So in a sense, this whole space becomes this womb of sorts, and that heartbeat might be the mother's heartbeat. That you'd hear inside that space. But this is not a human heartbeat. It's, now we're talking about technology, and with this, it's a robotic arm programmed in place of a human. And I think of a few things when we talk about this. One is how, as Indigenous people, we're born into generations of society where we are kind of faced with survival via exploitive, resource extraction or extraction from land in place. And so this kind of speaks to that with a removal of non-human heartbeat in the form of technology, so an automated technology. And we see a lot of automation replacing humans now in many forms, whether it's through technology and jobs or through automation through violence and sense. So.
Thank you, Nicholas. The next slide you will see is Nicholas's installation in Evans Way, and I just wanted to put a plug in, if you have not seen that, to please follow the circles outside the museum and see this lovely piece, which is called I Think It Goes Like This, Pick Yourself Up. Do you want to speak quickly about this?
Sure. So another piece that's here, when I came through Boston, I know that I get the sense that Boston loves monuments, and we like to work with the idea of monument, I do anyways, with how and who's represented and what narrative or history is allowed to be represented through monument. So the material of this work is purposefully chosen as bronze. The figure in this is reconstructing itself, so it's picking itself up, and the figure is created from chopped curio totems from our community, which there's kind of a capital economy around tourism and of our visual language and art that happens without us. The reference of the chopped totem also refers to historically how our totems were purposefully chopped up when missionaries came through our communities, mistaking the work for religious iconography, and in promise of this forced assimilation and promise of a Christian eternal afterlife, our community members were participating in the chopping of our cultural totems and burning them, essentially. So this work refers to that as well.
Thank you, Nicholas. The next question is back to Tess, and I just wanted, here we go. You speak several languages, and you're an expert in many visual languages. How do you see and hear language affecting the work and its reception? And this is a triennial installation.
Yeah, this is actually a perfect piece to talk about this question with. This is a work by Chinupa Hanskalugar named, it's titled Transmutation, and it's based off of some of his kind of Indigenous futurism works, really furthering his ideas that are centered on that. But the reason why language is so pertinent to this is because language is very much a part of the work itself. It was built with the help of, it was created with the help of several classes and many, many students on UMass Boston campus. Both in class formats, in drive-by in the campus center, you could stop at the booth, as well as at powwow at UMass Boston this year. It was really a community creation. It was a collaboration between the UMass Boston community, Native communities in the area, and beyond. And so this work, all of those ribbons you see that are tied between the two skulls, those two portals, all have words written on them. They're all images, words of hope and looking to the future and honoring the Buffalo Nation, because it's very much a part of Chinupa's identity as an Indigenous person coming from his own tribal identity. But you can see here's some words written there. But really beautiful thing about this work is that it became almost like this giant spell. It's putting these wonderful words and energy out into the world as it's being blown by the wind out at UMass Boston. And as we were building this work, as we were creating it, the most pertinent day that I think in terms of that question, Lisa, was at powwow. We had a booth set up there, the community was there, they were drumming, they were dancing, there was this wonderful energy and connection between the work and the people, and my people in particular. And over the course of that day, I think we had at least that day, 10 different languages that were written on this piece. And at least 5 or 6 of those were Indigenous languages. So you had everything from Nipmuc to Wampanoag to Mohican, Narragansett, you had Mayan, and beyond. I mean, we even saw things like Korean and Japanese and Chinese being written on this. So it was really, truly a collaboration. And that language, so much is a part of the work and understanding our connections to it and the agency that's tied to it for the students and the community at large in Boston. And so when you go and you visit it, you can read those words on those ribbons and really understand what kind of messaging and hope we're trying to put into the future on the winds.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Tess. Nicholas, back to you again. So the next slide, you'll see a piece by Nicholas called Never Forget. Nicholas, my question is, how do you think your work speaks to or challenges institutions?
I think the role of institution in, especially like Indigenous understandings of existence even, by default, we've sort of learned to navigate this institutional space. And this goes back all the way through to boarding schools and forced assimilation, into anthropology and archaeology, into the telling of history, I suppose, even. And at an early age myself, growing up, being trained culturally and being a woodcarver for my community, I could only access the ancestral work through institutional space, because part of the violence of colonization and genocide towards Indigenous people and the nation building of so-called United States is that not only was our ceremonies made illegal at some point in some communities, but our objects were trafficked. So, and to access those, there's an immense amount of our ancestral inheritance that is our atu. These are ceremonial objects that don't belong to us. They belong to 7 generations later, grandchildren's children. It's like they're in these institutional spaces. They're in the Smithsonian. They're in university basements. So learning to even access that, I had to, get there. I had to write these curators and try to gain access to archival cultural objects, wearing white gloves, not necessarily to worry about the damage of the object, but to protect ourselves from the arsenic that was placed onto these objects in so-called care and preservation form by these institutions. So by the nature of doing work about our existence right now, it's going to critique institutional space one way or another, because we're so embedded within navigating those spaces.
So this brings us to the next slide, which is also Nicholas's follow-up question. Are your artworks meant to teach, disrupt, or affirm, or does it perform another function?
They're just beautiful things to place on the wall and look at. No, that really varies too. There's not a sole purpose between each project and work, and certain ones hold conversations and stories in different ways. And I always try to be aware that the viewer's perspective is going to be their position on access to experience in the work, and everybody's perspectives are different. And so there's layers of kind of, it becomes a mirror sometimes to the viewer and what they're able to understand, or what they seek more information to find it in there. And sometimes this work holds place and does work that we don't have to do continually, because oftentimes as Indigenous people, we're requested to do one-on-one work for everybody and everything continually. And this work provides that opportunity of holding that narrative and layered discussion so that we don't have to continually be repeating ourselves.
Thank you. Tess, do you see your curatorial practice as activist, pedagogical, archival, or something else?
You know, I was thinking about Nicholas as he's talking about that question and related to museums and seeing ourselves in those spaces. And I mean, my mom will tell you that I used to call the MFA my museum because it was a place that I saw myself. It was my museum. It was where I encountered works by my community or communities like me. I grew up off island away from my community, so any chance that I could get to be around something that felt familiar, that felt like who I am, I took it. And so it was my museum for a very long time. And now I have museums that I get to say are actually my museums. They're the museums that I get to work for and steward and help along in these conversations. And you know, you ask, is my curatorial practice activist, pedagogical, archival, or something else? It's all of the above, because the work that I do is not for me, and it's not about me. It is so much larger than that. It is for the larger community that has never had a say. It is for Native people that have never been able to access these spaces. It is for the person that sees themselves in that space. I do the work for them because I want those young students, those young kids, even older generations, anyone, to be able to see themselves in these spaces and be able to access it. That's why public art, I think, is so powerful, because it is free and it's open to all. And that is something that is critical to understanding the framework and thought process that goes into curating, because when it is free and open to all, then you have the platform to be able to talk about just about anything you possibly could think of. You can support artists and community members in the work that they do and provide that space that's visible, that quote unquote monument, that easily accessible artwork, and make it a part of their identity too, make them seen. And so as a curator, the work that I do, I'm here, I'm a part of it, but it is not about me.
Thank you. The next slide, please. Nicholas, how do your two triennial commissions here and also in Evansway relate to the rest of your work?
I would say that my practice has a few, very established paths that I've come to understand through just the work that I explore and do. And it always connects back to my community and to land and to our history. It connects to our living community right now and to the future of our generation. So I feel like all of this work is directly connected with that. I stand on, these shoulders of my mentors that have held the culture and the work with care, and they've provided me mentorship to hopefully do the same. So yeah, I don't think I'll ever escape those things, and I'm not really trying to. So yeah.
And you also mentioned at lunch that you are also now a mentor, apprenticing young people to help carve totems. And the next question is for both of you. So this slide here you'll see is a piece called "In Every Language There Is Land." When planning for this conversation, one of the themes that emerged was the concept of kinship. What does kinship mean to each of you?
Can I start? Oh, sure.
You can go ahead.
Okay. My understanding of kinship is really embedded in so many things. Like, it's embedded in our harvesting and our cultural seasons of harvesting. It's embedded in our language, in our knowledge systems, and our protocols. I come from one of, the Tlingit community is really at the core. The balance is such an important part of it. And in that balance, things like wealth is redistributed to the community, and it's that's care, that's caring for, and in our harvesting, we harvest for other families. We harvest and distribute that harvest. at our ceremonies, the same thing. Wealth is broken and given and paid to our opposites. And that's such an opposite, that's such a drastic contrast to capitalism that consumes and creates billionaires that, while large members of society don't have basic human needs.
You know, I think about kinship as being so intimately tied to place for me, and being an ocean people, being from a community that's out on an island. Kinship is also with the waters. A lot of people think about relationship to land, but you also can't have land without water being as much a part of that. And so my connection, my kinship with both human and non-human beings is so much tied to my homelands and my people. And there's a level of responsibility tied to that. The work that I do as a curator is for that community, is for my people. And so there's a kinship tied to that. There's kinship ties to the belongings that I take care of and I steward. And all of those are tied to place. They're all tied to homelands and people and beings that make up that larger community, that make up that landscape. And so when I think about the title of your work, in every language there is land. Land is so much a part of who we are. Wampanoag are people of the first light. You know, it's that dawn. It's that time when you are connecting with the upper world and the land that you're living on, and really recognizing the interconnected nature of that.
Thank you. I was going to ask, are there non-human or more than human presences that you consider kin? And I think both of you should answer this if you'd like.
Oh, for sure. I've got 5 cats at home. And a corgi. And of course, there's all of the birds that we watch outside our houses, and the opossum that lives on our property. And all of those are so much a part of my kin relationship, my family, the people that I and beings that I'm tied to and I take care of. And there's a relationship between that. And I love them as much as I love my humans, you know?
Yeah, when we start like a kutia or a totem, part of the initial process is thanking the tree people. Before we start working on a red cedar, you know, these are old growth Western red cedar trees that are older than America, is what I like to say. And when we hunt or walk into the forest, you can speak to the forest. So absolutely, there, you know, even harvesting, you know, we thank the deer for providing for our family, and so those are, our kin.
And the slide that you're looking at right now is a piece by Nicholas called "We Dreamt Deaf." Tess, the next question is yours, or you can also answer, Nicholas. Next slide. Can kinship be a curatorial methodology? What does it look like to build exhibitions out of relationships rather than themes and objects?
It's something that I think more curators could learn from the kind of public programming world, actually, because so much of these works, like the piece that you're seeing here, which is A Moment for Joy by Alison Crony Moses, she's so intimately tied to the wood that she works with, but she's also tied with sharing out the work that she's doing and building a relationship with the communities that she's putting her work in. So for her, it was really important that this is tied to the Black mothers in the area of Charlestown, that she was working with those people, she's uplifting that community, she's involving them in the creation. And so absolutely, it can be a part of that curatorial process. It can also be a part of the artistic process. And I think there is no person, no artist, no curator out there that doesn't actually do that. They may just not have a name put to it.
Can I add to that too? I have, speaking to institutional spaces and museums, and when we look at things like repatriation of our cultural objects through NAGPRA or these other forms of returning things back to our communities, one thing that I always try to instill into these institutional spaces is that to truly care for the objects that you hold, you have to care for the community. And even if you return these things, you still have to maintain that relationship with that community. And it's an opportunity to do so. So, you know, there has to be a shift, and I think there will be in a lot of these spaces, but like, traditional museum culture was, ethnology and othering the culture that was there, but, really understanding what that responsibility is now is to establish and maintain a relationship with that community that's oftentimes still here and still living and still vibrant. And so.
Thank you. So Nicholas, you're a conceptual artist and you work with various materials, including metals, wood, porcelain, bronze, neon, textiles. Would you please talk about the role that materials play in your work?
Sure. I feel like my process is concepts first and stories and relationships to that, and then layered within that is the opportunity of material. For a few reasons, few reasons I feel like I've leaned towards this approach. One is that historically we've been so heavily romanticized and stereotyped into what is or isn't this authentic form of Indigenous work, whether it's the iconography, the process, the fact that your hands did it, whatever. And for me, there was some freedom and power in being able to, explode that in a different way, or I remove those. I think of my work as removing border oftentimes, and it's removing a boundary, and that doing so in medium allows for that.
And would you like to say anything about this piece? You were trained as a jeweler. This piece is called...
Oh yeah, Indian Children's Bracelet. So this works, it's a work about the removal of Indigenous children and the placement of them into boarding schools. And as time reveals the stories of these survivors in our communities, we learn that a lot of these, they weren't just boarding schools. There's graveyards in these spaces. There's still living cultures today that are impacted by the break of family care, and so that work speaks towards that side of American settler history.
And the next slide is called White Noise, American Prayer Rug. This was a piece that you included in the 2019 Whitney Biennial?
Yeah. So this is also a work speaking about media, I suppose, and this work was actually part of a biennial where we went into it knowing that there was, a lot of public dialogue about the source of support in the Whitney from the board and the board members, and there was a board member there that was profiting off of, profit off pain, so fabricating tear gas that is sold and oftentimes used on, our borders. Was recently used during that time at the U.S.-Mexico border on women and children, and so going into the Whitney at that time, there was this really kind of strong undertone of conversations happening within the institution, within the artists and the space, and it was a tricky thing to navigate for a lot of people, I think. But that work was I was one of 4 artists, so we pulled our work in protest, and then the board member stepped down, and not just because of that, many things I think going on into it, and the work ended up staying up. So.
Thank you.
So these are, museums are also political spaces in a lot of ways beyond art and beyond the...
Yes. So. The next slide, Tess, is a piece that you curated into the Triennial, New Red Order's Material Monument to Thomas Morton. So my question is, how can institutions better support Indigenous-led art practices?
We've spent a lot of time talking tonight about access, and I think that that's one that I'll just continue to kind of beat into people, is that it is a privilege for Native people to come into your spaces. It's a privilege to work with them. It's a privilege to work with us. It's a privilege to have the opportunity to learn. One of the things that I often say to museums, and I've had to say to organizations I've worked for, is that you need to sit down for a moment and listen and let the community tell you what they want from the relationship. Let them lead the conversation, because so much of the time we're left out of that conversation. We're not at the table. We don't have access to our belongings. We don't have access to this information. I mean, Nicholas mentions having to email curators to even see his ancestral belongings. And so simply providing the chance to speak, to be listened to be actually heard, and then to be able to access is a really big deal. When we build relationships with the trustees, when we build relationships with tribal communities, oftentimes the community says, well, we don't want to, for example, if we were crafting a land acknowledgement, or if we were seeking to have Indigenous interpretation in the galleries, they're actually seeking access to the landscape first. We don't want, they've told us before, we don't necessarily want to craft you some fantastical way of speaking or acknowledging our communities. We want on the ground access to these spaces, because that is how you acknowledge the land. You don't give a land acknowledgement. You acknowledge the people, you acknowledge the place, you acknowledge all that goes within that. And so my my kind of rah-rah sit on a soapbox is very much about access and listening. And this piece here, you should all go see in person, because it's an incredible work, and was definitely a moment of listening for a lot of us at the Triennial and learning, because New Red Order is an incredibly smart group of guys that really turn your head on thinking about what monuments are and how we monumentalize people, because that's not a Native guy, that's a white guy. But I invite you to learn more. Go see it.
It's located in Faneuil Hall. The next slide for Nicholas. What do you hope remains with the visitors after they experience your work?
I think the work has a lot of opportunity, and it's meant to have opportunities for people to engage and understand their positions in the community, their positions in, I guess, society. And it's not really, I don't have like a goal other than that, just to let them have some more insight into it, and I think it allows for that dialogue and discourse to continue. So I hope that dialogue and discourse could remain.
So this is my last question. Tess, congratulations to you and Pedro for organizing such a terrific Boston Public Art Triennial. Here is another piece from the Triennial. It ends on October 31st, so I invite you all to please go check out this wonderful celebration of art all around Boston. And on behalf of and now that the Triennial's over, Tess, what are your next project thoughts? What's percolating in your head?
I'm still going to stay in the public art realm, actually. I'm still working for the trustees. I will probably work for them until the end of time, because they're an organization that's actually willing to make a difference and willing to listen. And so the next thing I have on the horizon is a show I'm planning that's going to be a multi-site exhibition of New England-based artists, 3 women that are creating works on 3 different trustee sites that are based on storytelling and placemaking and placekeeping. And so definitely come out next June. There'll be more information to come as it's shared, but more work, hopefully, like what you're seeing Adela's on the screen, will be all around the state, not just Boston.
Thank you, Tess. So on behalf of the Triennial, I'd also like to invite all of you to a special incendiary performance this Friday, September 12th, from 7 to 9 in City Hall Plaza, where this piece by Adela Goldbard, excuse my Spanish, Invadieron por mar, respondemos con fuego, pictured here, and you're not going to want to miss this performance. Tess, Nicholas, thank you so very much for sharing your thoughts and dreams with us and explaining the work.
Okay, thank you so much, both of you, or all three of you, for a wonderful conversation. So we have time for a few questions from the audience. We've been receiving questions throughout your talk this evening. And so we have time for maybe 2 questions, maybe one for Nicholas and then one for Tess. So I'll start with a question for Nicholas. Nicholas, we have a question from Delilah T. Delilah's asking, your installation in Boston, I think it goes like this, pick yourself up, reimagines broken totems in bronze, a material often used for colonial monuments. How has this experience of creating and installing work in Boston impacted you personally and artistically?
Yeah, the work does speak directly towards, I suppose, monuments and medium, especially too, and form. So, how has it impacted me? I don't know if there's like a direct impact right now. Sometimes work has time and it takes on a life. I'm here now with you all, so that's one impact. So I get to come back to Boston and experience some more of the city and the community. I get to express work in a space that I feel like is pretty new for Boston, I think. The idea that this is the first triennial, is that right? So, I think that's really special to be part of. And I understand that that's such a large undertaking for not only the organizers and those that are supporting it, but to get through bureaucratic sides of what this means in a space that is willing to host artists and ideas and conversations that oftentimes interrogate history and stuff. So I think that is probably the greatest kind of experience for me from that, is being part of that. So.
Great, thank you so much. And we have a question for Tess. So this is a question without a name, but somebody is asking, you mentioned that growing up, the MFA was your museum, and that your approach to your work is so that other people can see themselves in art spaces. What was your earliest memory of seeing yourself in a work of art?
Oh, that's a hard one, because it definitely was not in a museum. Seeing myself in an artwork. Probably playing with mud when I was a kid. I'm a ceramicist. It was one of my majors here. I knew when I was in high school that I was like, I'm going to go to MassArt. That's where I'm going to go. I didn't think I was going to go anywhere else. I only applied to one college. I got in. It was great. But prior to that, I was building mud pies outside my house. I was drawing chalk on the ground, and it was always depictions of things that represented me. The kids in the neighborhood, we all spent time together building our identities through, I guess you could say, public art when we were kids. And so it's no wonder that I end up in that space now, both as an artist and as a curator and community member.
Thank you so much. And we're doing good on time, so maybe 2 more questions. A question maybe for Lisa and for Tess. A question of how has the Boston community responded to Aáni, duwasáakw, or I Am Codland, Nicholas's installation at MassArt Art Museum? That's a question from Annie P.
So MAAM was super excited to be a museum partner for the Triennial, and as such, we commissioned a second piece by a Triennial artist, Nicholas's piece. I'm very happy to say it's loved. We have gotten a lot of press coverage, more so than we would have gotten in other shows, I think. And lots of people come to the Evans Way piece and then make their way to our piece and really, spend time in the galleries, looking at it, experiencing it. Over the summer, Brian created a program called Slow Art Thursdays, where people were just invited to come in and shut their phone off and lie down on the beanbags and just be swept away by the meditative, heartbeat, which is 70 beats per minute. So it's very relaxed. So I think people, the community, our students, the art-going public have really, really enjoyed Nicholas's piece. Thank you so much for working with us on that.
Thank you.
I brought a group through of emerging curators and museum professionals, all Native women, through the exhibition. And we walked into that space, and one of the women is from your community, and she instantly knew what she was seeing, but she had never felt that kind of energy that comes from that work in a museum space or a gallery as formal as MAAMs are. And she sat on the beanbags, and I remember just watching her face light up, feeling like she was home, because she's, from a community on the West Coast, really upper West Coast, and far from home. And to be able to feel like she was transported back to where her waters and her lands and her people are was a really wonderful experience to be a part of. And the other women experienced it beautifully as well, but it was really poignant to watch her, her shoulders just kind of go down and her head kind of just relax. And it was just a moment of clarity for me also, like, this is the reason why we do this.
And I think the juxtaposition of those materials, the trees from forever ago, and then this new technology, which you don't see it right away. You have to be very observant when you come up the stairs. You might see a shadow of the robot arm beating, but it's placed in a very clever way, Nicholas, that nobody knows what's behind the drum. And so then you have that big reveal. So it's so very thoughtful, but then it has that lovely reference to your community. The Tlingit is, people of the ties. You have the water all around you that's sort of sweeping you away. You have that drum beat that one person said it made the whole gallery feel like it was a body in itself. And that was the heart of the gallery space. So super resonant, amazing.
And Tess, maybe to broaden a little bit, some questions about the kind of triennial more broadly, and thinking about what has the public's reaction to maybe the triennial been?
Well, all I've experienced is good things. So I can tell you that there's, in all honesty, there's definitely been some hard moments. I can tell you that, and that kind of comes with building exhibitions that are in public spaces and working with people. There's always going to be those difficult moments, but there's always going to be, kind of a light at the end of the tunnel. And curating this has been such a privilege, and being a part of the community in this way has been such a privilege. And to build relationships now with artists that I wasn't familiar with and now can call friends has been really wonderful. And so the triennial at large, I have been overwhelmingly seeing fantastic and really exciting responses. But in those moments where it's hard, there's also excitement. There's also good within that, because we're all learning and we're all growing and we're kind of shaping what this space, Boston, what that is. And can be in the future. And so I was saying it before we started this, there's been some hard moments recently, and nothing good was ever easy. And so in this moment, nothing good was ever easy, but it's good.
Tess, earlier this evening, you spoke about the privilege of listening, and it's been such a privilege for us to listen to both you and also Nicholas and Lisa. Thank you for moderating tonight. Can we give a very large round of applause to our panelists?